And again, I'm going to go fairly quickly through this. Some of this, a lot of you already know. It's really just to make sure we're all on the same page with respect to lenacapavir. And this is a slide presentation that we'll make available to all of you if you want to adapt it, change it in your own settings, because for a lot of people on this call, we've been talking about lenacapavir for more than a year, even before the results, when this was just an idea of science. And many of you have worked on this already. But for a lot of our communities and constituencies, this is entirely new. So I really want to encourage you to use this. And if it's not working for you, tell us, we'll make edits. We want to make this better for all of us. But we'll go through Len, the trials, the regulatory update, the stakeholder work, and then what really are the key advocacy issues that we need to take forward. You know this, the world has made progress, but you can see, we've begun to slow that progress. And even with each additional prevention option from oral PrEP, which we first learned about its safety and efficacy 15 years ago, through the vaginal ring, through CAB, now with Len, we are still far off the target. And that was before January 20th, 2025. And we know that it's going to be far more disruptive and difficult to reach. And hopefully you all know, and someone in the team can put in the chat, we now have a number of trackers online, one looking at prevention research, the other looking at PEPFAR and the impact of the stop work orders. And you can see here that the lion's share of oral PrEP programs depended on PEPFAR. Key population programming, losing access to key populations because of terrible decisions by the US government. And cabotegravir, which PEPFAR was really in the leading front of, we're clearly not going to even come close to the target for 2024 and 2025 with cabotegravir, again, because of these terrible decisions by the US administration. So I talk a lot about lenacapavir and the approval last week as being a cruel irony that one of our greatest scientific opportunities coming at one of the worst times in PrEP and prevention and in global health generally. This is the pipeline as you've seen it presented by us before. Cabotegravir's price dropping to $160 per year this year. This said possible regulatory approval. It's now approved in June of 2025. But you can see that both lenacapavir and the dual prevention pill are on track to get expressions of interest for pre-qualification and guidelines this year, and you'll hear more from Michelle Rodoff in just a little bit. And I just wanted to highlight here in the middle, toward the bottom, that the monthly oral tablet MK8527 is just beginning its efficacy trials later this year, in the next couple of months. So although we're excited by Len, it's not perfect. No product is perfect. And this monthly oral tablet is going in now to into trials later this year. But what about Len? We have a document online from last year, the Lens on Len. It gives you the basics of injectable lenacapavir. It's a unique drug class. It's what's called a capsid inhibitor. And I won't get into all the details, but this is the first of its kind in HIV treatment or in prevention, this capsid inhibitor. It is delivered through 2 subcutaneous injections in the abdomen once every 6 months. And it gets a little confusing because we talk about this as every 6-month injections, but each time you visit the clinic, you need to get 2 injections right in a row. In addition, when you start lenacapavir, you have an oral loading dose. And again, we have a great new graphic I'll show you in just a couple of minutes that gives you a visual depiction of what this is. Gilead Sciences developed the product, and it is right now the lone manufacturer. Although they licensed 6 generic companies late last year, we expect them to get to the market in the next year or so. It was approved for a very small number of people on treatment for multi-drug resistant HIV in 2022. It's not widely used. And again, we began to see data not only of this every 6-monthly injection, but earlier this year, the once-a-year lenacapavir was shown in a phase 1 trial to have promising results that could come to the market in the next 3 years or so if the science continues. Again, lots more information on the Lens on Len. We've been talking a lot about cabotegravir for these last several years, and this just gives you a side-by-side comparison. I won't go into it in detail, but it just gives you a sense of the way these products are different. They're both injections, but other than that, they're very different. They are injected in different places. There's a different amount of drug. As I said, lenacapavir has this oral loading dose. So lots of differences. Now, this is focused primarily on low and middle income countries. You can see the price of cabotegravir, $160 per person per year. We don't yet know the price of lenacapavir. We expect it to be everything people have said it's going to be lower than cabotegravir per year, but we don't know exactly how low. But we think it's going to be around $100 per person per year. And we think generics are going to come to the market for both products around the same time. In the next year and a half or so, 3 companies licensed to make cabotegravir and 6 companies licensed to make lenacapavir. The PURPOSE program is the program designed by Gilead to demonstrate that lenacapavir would be safe and effective. And we talk a lot about PURPOSE 1 and 2, and you can see those at the very top. Those were very large efficacy trials. Of course, spectacular results presented last year. There are 3 other studies, 3, 4, and 5, that are being run for different populations, very small studies that would allow broader information to come from cisgender women in the US, from people who inject drugs in the US, and from those in Europe. But again, those trials are ongoing even as the product is now approved by the Food and Drug Administration. You've seen these data presented many times. This just gives you a quick headline snapshot of the 2 studies, the PURPOSE 1 study in cisgender women and the PURPOSE 2 study in men and gender diverse persons, both showing remarkable efficacy. Of course, Linda Gale Becker led this PURPOSE 1 study, and there were no infections amongst those who got lenacapavir. In PURPOSE 2, there were 2 infections amongst those who got Len, but still 96% efficacy. But of course, as you see in this editorial from Rochelle Walensky and Lindsay Baden, the real purpose was not efficacy. We need to understand effectiveness. Can it work in the real world? And that's why these other headlines reflect that it's not just about the science, because to be honest, cabotegravir and oral PrEP also are over 90% efficacious. The vaginal ring, less efficacious, but oral PrEP and cabotegravir are in the 90% range, but it only matters if the products get used effectively. And so that's the challenge for all of us. This just is a quick snapshot of the study design. I won't get into the detail. It was quite a novel design. It also demonstrated the comparative role of FTAF. We've been working with FTDF, and we expect FTAF, which has only been approved for everybody except women at risk of vaginal transmission of HIV. We expect that the PURPOSE 1 study will allow the label for FTAF to be broader. That's not happened yet. Again, I won't go into the details of the design other than to say it was designed by Gilead Sciences, but with a much deeper and durable community engagement than we've seen from Gilead in past trial designs, and it really did have a number of important elements, including the enrollment of young people aged 16 and 17, and the ability to include women who did become pregnant or were breastfeeding in this study. So we have more data about these other populations now than we've done early in other PrEP products. Again, enrolled in South Africa, Uganda, many thousands of women. It was superior, very far superior, with 0 infections compared to both oral PrEP as well as to the background HIV rate. And this just gives you a snapshot of what you can see here. The background incidence was expected to be 2.4, and it was 0. 0 in lenacapavir. And FTAF and FTDF lower than background, but still much higher than lenacapavir. There are side effects, and there are side effects in every product. Every product, for PrEP and for every medical condition, there are side effects. There were similar rates of headaches and UTIs across study arms. There was less nausea and vomiting with len than with oral pills. But one of the most common side effects were injection site reactions, which happen with injections. And very particularly, this product, because it gets injected every 6 months, it can create for many people a nodule, a space under the skin where the drug sits, and over the 6th month, it goes, the drug goes out, and that nodule dissipates. Will that nodule affect people's acceptance of lenacapavir? We don't know. In the efficacy trials, it didn't seem to prevent people from coming back, but that's an efficacy trial, and we don't know what's going to happen in the real world. Purpose 2, slightly different design, but again, it included younger 16 and 17-year-olds. It compared lenacapavir to daily oral PrEP as well as this background incidence, and again, incredibly effective. 96% reduction compared to background HIV, 89% reduction compared to oral TDF. Remember, oral TDF FTC is still a wonderful option. It is still very safe and very effective for those who can take a pill every day, or for these populations in Purpose 2 can do event-driven dosing. So it is very possible to use many different types of PrEP. Len is just one of them. And it's really important that we don't talk about Len at the expense of these other products. This just shows the result and the power of Len in reducing the risk of infection. Again, similar injection site reactions, and particularly the nodules in a number of participants in the study, but it overall seemed to be safe and effective. And again, I'll just flag, and I think Jim has said something in the chat, real world implications of those nodules. Will that change for people in the real world? We don't know. And particularly in Purpose 2, there are contraindications with other medications, including treatments for migraines. And for those who use erectile dysfunction medication, it's contraindicated. So these are real issues. Len is not going to be for everybody, and no product is for everybody. We know that. We know we need options and choices. A little more information on these 2 participants in Purpose 2 who did acquire HIV in the course of the study. This just gives an example of both participants. With cabotegravir, there were what was called the Levi syndrome. It was this idea that you had delayed diagnosis of HIV if you were on cabotegravir. We did not see that with lenacapavir. That's a good thing. Obviously, we don't want people to acquire HIV, but we don't want to see the delayed diagnosis. So Len does perform better, at least in what we know from these 2 participants. They did have Len concentrations comparable to what other participants in the study had. So we really don't understand fully what happened in those infections. They did develop this resistance to the capsid mutation. And, with cabotegravir, we worried a lot about the resistance potentially. If you took cabotegravir and did get HIV, that you might be resistant to other treatment, particularly dolutegravir, the leading treatment. We don't see the same concern with lenacapavir because it's a capsid inhibitor. The capsid inhibitor is not widely used for treatment. So the issue of resistance, which is a big conversation in cabotegravir programs, does not seem to be as big an issue with lenacapavir. Again, I want to be clear, it doesn't mean cabotegravir is not as good as Len. They are different, just different products that work differently. So what happens next? This gives you a quick snapshot of where things are. And of course, FDA approval just happened on June 19th, just last week, less than a week ago. In addition, Gilead has applied to the European Medicines Agency, and they've applied through 2 different tracks in the EMA. They have applied through the regular European process so that it could be approved in Europe, but they also applied through the Medicines for All program. And for those on the line who were very involved, as many of you were, with the dapivirine vaginal ring, you'll remember Article 58. That was a process by which the European regulator reviewed the science of the product in partnership with regulators in low and middle income countries. So the Medicines for All program has replaced Article 58. But it's the same idea. And the EMA is reviewing lenacapavir now in partnership with a number of low and middle income regulators. We expect a result in September, and that would mean with that medicines for all approval, and we expect WHO guidelines coming soon, that it would accelerate the registration of this product in a number of low and middle income countries throughout East and Southern Africa, Asia, and Latin America very rapidly. Gilead has also already applied in Brazil and South Africa, and other countries will receive applications through the M4All process. The big question, of course, back in December, PEPFAR and Global Fund announced an effort to reach 2 million people with lenacapavir. Obviously, everything changed in January with the U.S. withdrawal from foreign assistance. Global Fund has restated its commitment to lenacapavir, and they are now identifying a number of priority countries, which we expect to hear about around the time of the IAS meeting, if not before. So we'll see WHO guidelines as well as Global Fund priority countries. So at least Global Fund is moving fast and furiously. We believe PEPFAR will still be involved. And again, this is where I think advocates can really play a critical role. PEPFAR has said that they are still providing PrEP to pregnant and breastfeeding women. Now, that's not as broad as we would want. We want it for everybody at risk. But we need to at least push PEPFAR programs that exist to make sure that LEN is part of PrEP programming for pregnant and breastfeeding women. What happened with stakeholder engagement? And this really is a great testament to the power of so many of you on the line. I know many of you on the line are part of the African Women's Prevention Community Accountability Board. Many of you are also part of the Key Population Prevention Advisory Group. Those two groups met multiple times with Gilead and really pushed for Gilead to design these trials differently than they've been done in the past and to conduct these trials differently. And you can see this is actually a slide that shows the level of engagement. And it's been relatively well documented. Was it perfect? No. Just as no product is perfect, no engagement is perfect. But it did reflect an attempt to really learn from past lessons. And I think we all know that Gilead has failed in the past with the Discover study and with previous studies. And they did a much better job. And others on the line are going to comment on that, I think, coming up. You can see what early engagement meant. It meant that the trials were designed with a community-centered approach, with community voices involved in the protocol design, the materials, the messages, the idea that the study enrolled adolescents, that it maintained reproductive choice without mandatory contraception, that it continued participation of pregnant and lactating people. This was thanks to the work of all of you. Yes, Gilead was receptive to that, but this was thanks to all of you who made that happen and made these trials better. We have to make sure that that level of engagement continues in rolling this product out. So what does that mean from research to rollout? This is a snapshot comparing the different PrEP products. And none of this has been easy, but you can see with oral PrEP, it's taken more than a decade. And I would argue we still aren't fully at scale even, but it's taken a long time to reach that. We aren't yet there at all with the vaginal ring. We first learned of its efficacy 9 years ago. Cabotegravir, it's been 5 years since we learned of its efficacy, and only a few thousand people around the world are on cabotegravir. Can we do better with LEN? Early signs are good. We see approval happening faster. We believe WHO recommendation is going to come a year earlier. We believe generics are going to come in at year 3 as opposed to year 7, or in the case of the vaginal ring, maybe even 10 years post-efficacy. So the world is doing better in these milestones, but it's still a question of, are people going to get it at scale? So there are, again, early indications that I think we can be proud of, but much more work to be done. There are 2 documents online. I'm not going to go through the details, and they are hyperlinked if you, when you get the slides. One is the plan for accelerating access to lenacapavir. It really looks at a high-level strategy to ensure that lenacapavir gets delivered, and it provides a number of advocacy priorities that we put out about a year ago. And then late last year, we also put out a document called the Gears of Len Rollout. This provides a very specific roadmap for how to get to 5 million people by 2030, if not earlier. So even more ambitious than what the Global Fund and PEPFAR committed to. It also talks about how to get the price down to $100 at launch at this phase 0, which is right now, and hopefully down to lower than $40 within the next 3 to 5 years. I won't go into the details here, but those exist as resources. If they're not what you need to help your advocacy, to help our advocacy, tell us. We can update these. We will constantly work with all of you to make sure that everyone is working with the information they need so that we can make sure governments, implementers, and donors do what they need to do. So in the plan, we talked about fast tracking regulatory approvals. We just got FDA approval last week. We need to continue to push Gilead to go faster with in-country applications. They're relying on the M4All program. We need to really engage with that as advocates and be sure that countries are ready. And it talks particularly about, we put the document out just as Gilead announced the voluntary licensing agreements. The good news, those licensing agreements came a year and a half earlier than similar agreements came for cabotegravir. The bad news, they excluded huge parts of the globe, including Latin America and parts of Asia. So we really need to push Gilead to make sure that licensing agreements meet the needs of everyone, everywhere. So there's equity and access, no matter where you live. And a big advocacy point that we have at AVAC, everyone should have access to lenacapavir at an affordable price, not based on the World Bank economic status, low income versus middle income versus upper income, but based on epidemiologic need. That should be our advocacy priority. Years again talked about the role of each of these stakeholders. There is a huge amount of attention on Gilead Sciences, and rightly so. They developed this product, they're manufacturing this product, they are selling this product. But there are so many other partners who we need to push. And I want to make sure that as we go forward together as advocates, that we are moving all of these levers, all of these gears. Because even if Gilead did everything right, if national governments aren't ready, if the donors aren't ready, if civil society's not ready, if the UN agencies are ready, if the generics aren't ready, it doesn't matter. No one agency, no one entity can do it all. And we really have to make sure that every one of these entities is targeted with strategic advocacy to be sure that we are pushing for all the right things everywhere. And we should be pushing Gilead about price, about licensing, but we also need to push Global Fund and PEPFAR and Unitaid and the Gates Foundation to procure it. We need to push our national governments to go much faster. We need to push our regulators. Remember, I know many of you are on the line from Kenya. Kenya was one of the first countries to receive the application for cabotegravir, and the regulatory agency in Kenya sat on it for 15 months. That was not ViiV's fault. That was the regulatory agency's fault. So we have to remember that there's advocacy directed at every one of these gears. This gives you a sense of what can happen. This began last year. This is what we call phase 0. We believe it should be at $100 per person per year and no more. Moving forward into the next 2 years below $100 per person per year, as we hope to see scale up to 10 million vials for shipment. That would be enough for 2.5 million people. Again, remember, you get 2 injections twice a year. So you get 4 injections a year of Len, 2 on month 0, 2 more on month 6. So that 10 million vials is enough for 2.5 million people, but we need far bigger quantities to get the price even lower. The estimate is to get to these lower prices, you need about 10 million people on lenacapavir. That would mean 40 million vials of Len. So a lot of work to be done here. Again, we can unpack this if people have questions. PEPFAR and Global Fund in December announced the desire to reach 2 million people. That was great news, although we were pushing for 5 million people. We believe 2 million is Ambitious, way more than we saw with CAB or oral PrEP in the early launches, but still, we believe it could be more ambitious. The good news is the Global Fund, and thanks to Ida, who's on the line, wrote a brilliant article back in March, getting Peter Sands, the head of the Global Fund, to go on record to say that he was still committed. That's great advocacy. Getting the head of Global Fund to commit to that in the press was super important, and we can keep holding them to that. One of the things you'll see in these announcements is the idea to reach 2 million people with LEN. And there are a lot of questions about what does 2 million person years of protection mean? And you'll often hear people say 2 million doses, but we wanted to spend just a minute to make sure that we are all on the same page. 2 million people getting, hello, Michelle, welcome. 2 million people getting access to LEN per year means 8 million vials of lenacapavir. And I'll show again a graphic in just a minute. Gilead has said that they have the capacity to make even 10 million vials per year if donors were to procure it. So the issue is, can we really drive people to get the larger volumes? Because that's what's going to drive the price down. Bigger volumes, lower prices. So we really need to make sure that the programs are ready to both buy the product and to program the product. Because if we don't build the market now in the next 3 years, even with 6 generic companies making it, they'll compete with each other to make the product cheaper and cheaper. More companies competing makes the price lower. But if PEPFAR, Global Fund, governments, Unidaid and Gates Foundation and SIF, all the different funders, if they don't buy the product, the price won't come down. And as I've said repeatedly, even if we do this halfway better or twice as better as CAB and half as well as the objective, we could really begin to see real progress. Just wanted to give a quick graphic because this person years of protection does get complicated. This just shows you the 4 different modalities. And this doesn't show event driven because that's dependent on how much sex you have. But if you're taking a daily pill, you need 365 pills. If you're on the vaginal ring, you need 12 rings. If you're on CAB, in your first year, you need 7 injections and then 6 injections every year after that. And this shows you the dosing of lenacapavir. On day 1, 2 injections and 2 pills. On day 2, 2 more pills. And then 6 months, 2 injections. If you don't come back within a 2-week window of that 6th month, if you miss it by more than 2 weeks, the recommendation is that you take these oral tablets again as that loading dose. So again, there's an adherence issue. So when people say, oh, 6 monthly injection doesn't have an adherence issue, that's not true. It's a different kind of adherence than daily pill taking, but adherence still is an issue. So we're going to have to help participants and people who on LEN understand the importance of coming back on a timely visit schedule. Online, and I won't go into the detail here, there is this tracker of tracking lenacapavir rollout, and you can roll over any one of these bars to see what's supposed to be happening, and you'll see a little thing pop up and tell you if it's on track or not. And you can see it either by the pathway, whether it's about the product or the regulatory process, or by the actual stakeholder. What needs to happen from Gilead, what from donors, what from WHO, what from other entities. Gives you a sense of generics. Lenacapavir is going much faster to generics. We expect by the end of next year, if not earlier, both LEN and CAB generics will be presented to regulatory agencies around the same time. And I won't go through the detail here in the interest of time, but it just shows you how the time was compressed and why these 2 generic versions may come to market around the same time. There is this once-a-year injection. It's about 3 years away. I won't go into the details here, but just want people to be aware of it, that lenacapavir is not the end of R&D. Once-a-year LEN, once a month oral PrEP from Merck, this product called MK8527, all potential products. And there are other options too, definitely. So this is not the end of the road. This just gives you a sense of what happens in the next 3 to 4 years. We'll see generic cabotegravir. We'll also see a 4-month version of CAB, we think, late next year. The generic lenacapavir around the same time. Once a year lenacapavir shortly after. and then this monthly tablet. Now, we talk a lot about choices. I don't think personally that everyone's going to have all four of these options in the market at the same time. And this doesn't include daily oral prep or the vaginal ring. But you can see that there'll be a number of options from which donors, governments, and individuals will be able to choose. I want to turn it over to our partners in just a minute, but you can see some critical issues here about pricing and supply, holding Gilead accountable. But we need to also create demand in country, working with PrEP programs that exist, working with governments. There's the regulatory issue, the exclusion of Latin America, generic manufacturing. And remember, generics are not nonprofit agencies who just want to do good. We're going to have to hold them to account to be sure that they go quickly and that they also price fairly and equitably in the market when they get to the market. We need to support in parallel. There are still research questions. Some of these drug-drug interactions, the idea of people, what people's perspectives of the nodules will be. There are a number of research questions still that need to be answered, but those should not be done in advance of programmatic scale up. We need to go in parallel. In oral prep, things happen sequentially. Even in the vaginal ring and in cabotegravir, things were happening more sequentially than they should have. We need to work in parallel to go faster. And we need transparency and continuous learning. We don't have the time to wait for 2 or 3 or 5 years to get a research result. We need real-time lessons. We need it documented. We need to collaborate, and that's where advocates can really push this at the country level and sharing across countries. Pricing. Again, this is low and middle income country pricing. You can see that CAB came down almost the same as the vaginal ring. We believe that Len is going to come out about $100 or $120. We think, we don't know. Global Fund and Gilead are negotiating that now. And as you will have seen just last week, Andrew Hill and colleagues published another modeling analysis. Last year, they presented data to show that it could get down to $40 per person per year with 10 million users of Len. They now have updated data to say that it could actually get down to closer to $25 per person per year. So lower than the price of oral prep. Again, we have to really push volumes high to get prices low, and we need to get that moving quickly. And this is the Andrew Hill study that I talked about, and gives you a sense of what can be done if we move up with scale. In the US, Gilead has said it's going to be priced similar, $28,000 per year in the United States. Obviously, it's one of the reasons so few people in the United States are able to access cabotegravir for PrEP, because the price is too high. The same is true with lenacapavir. So there's a whole, and I know Jim is putting in the chat, there's a lot of work that needs to happen in the US around pricing as well to drive that price much lower. Again, I've said a lot of this before. We need to build the volumes. We need to get multiple generics, because it's that competition between generics that drives price down. There are a lot of things that need to happen across all the different gears, all the different decision makers. And again, I talked about that earlier, and I won't go into detail. A lot of this, we've said, I want to move us along to make sure that we get all the other inputs. Lots of resources on the web, avac.org/lenacapavir. I'm going to stop there.